Hi, folks. Welcome back for another episode of our platform thinking and design podcast at Ergonomically. This is, I think, the seventh episode. Today, I'm really excited to have Saim here with me. He is a contributor to the CNCF White Paper on platforming. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. Saim, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Thank you, everyone. Hope everybody listening to me correctly, or if you have some echoing or anything on my voice, do let me know in the chat. But thank you very much, Jabe. It is a pleasure talking. I think this is the first time I'm being on the show of anybody else. I've been podcasting for the last 3 years, and I'm closing on approaching 200 episode, 78. I'm planning to host this tomorrow with Jim Bagwadia of Kaiverno, but it's been a super excited time. So folks who doesn't know me, my name is Saim Safdar, currently working as a developer relations manager at Office System. I am a CNCF ambassador, hosting podcasts like Jabe, and I'm also a founder of Cloud Native Islamabad community, where we're showing some workshops on latest technologies around CNCF landscape. Over to you, Jabe.
Excellent. So usually when I try, you should give me the links to your podcast. I'll put them in the show notes for everybody later, so that they can go over and follow your podcast and get some more insights from your guests over there. That'd be great. Usually I like to start with platform conversations because people have kind of a divergent idea of what a platform is. With just asking, like, how would you define a platform for this conversation? How should people think about what platforms are?
I think it's been we have so many buzzwords, so many different the context around platform engineering is, but I kind to let people know that platform engineering is not a new concept. It has been existed for a long time in companies such as Google, Amazon, Facebook, Netflix, and many other large companies. And for any large scale product engineering team, a platform is a set of standard services, framework, framework and patterns that are originally developed by one or more teams for their use, and that can be leveraged by other teams of the organization. The rest of the engineering organization either uses these platform services to develop other application or services such as internal tool. So product team used to build many of these shared services and tools internally when open source commercial framework and platform as services and tools weren't unavailable. A good example is Google internal container management platform Borg, which eventually became Kubernetes. So I've tried to drive the conversation in a way to understand like what is the best possible way to define a product, a platform, or the platform engineering in general. So basically, I think if so, first question came into my mind. So what exactly is platform in the context of cloud native application development and deployment? Is it an internal developer platform, a developer self-service portal, or a developer experience tool, or simply a developer onboarding tool? Are there user other than developer who use the platform? So in order to define those criteria, we need to come up with to solidify all these categories. So I think that what I said, the internal developer platform or the developer self-service portal or the developer experience tool or the developer onboarding tool, I think the answers seem to be yes in many cases. The platform I think that we now refer is a combination of all of the above and more, since most of the foundational services are available as an either open source or commercial products or both. A platform engineering team's main goal is to make these services and tools easily discoverable, readily available in a self-service manner, and more usable using standard interfaces such as API, UI, self-service portal, Terraform, etc. I know it's so much of that I have wired down to the platform engineering term, but it's generally happen because there is so much to talk about when to defining the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so, in your definition, the platform, at least an internal developer platform, is an enabler of developers, a way of enabling them to work better, create safer, higher quality code, things like this. Um, are there any other when you guys were working on the white paper? Were there any other primary stakeholders that you were thinking about when you thought through the platform, or is it just in your mind primarily about developer excellence, developer productivity, things like this?
So I think in the CNCF, we have a platform working group within the CNCF. I think the way the CNCF work is like they have a different working groups, and somebody is leading the working group, and you become a part of that working group and work with other companies, folks, or other individuals to help resolve, to help come up with the definitions and or the paperworking that suit best need for the community.
Mm,
So we're working with it. They called Tag App Delivery. Under Tag App Delivery, this is called a platform working group. So basically, when we are working together, we try to elaborate in a way for a larger audience. And we always says to ourselves, remember, develop platform is not just a developer tooling or
mm,
developer onboarding tooling, or let's say or simply there is so much into it. You can enable this for the FinOps people,
mm,
product team,
mm,
marketing people.
mm,
This is all become a part of the larger umbrella within the platform working group. So we define in a way like it's remove the cognitive load from the
mm,
development team. Number
mhm,
one is because the development developer team has to deal with so much. Like they have to spin up services, they have to test the environment, they have to build the development, testing, production environment simply to your word app to work with. So that's enough. So developer is one of those, but remember, FinOps is another category.
mm,
There is a product team that has another category, and
mm,
you can name it like develop. The platform doesn't solve the one particular need, because remember, why we are building platform in to help individual to understand or to bring them the knowledge or bring them the language that can be usable across the organization. Because remember, product team and the marketing team using the different languages,
mm,
and the development team is using the different languages. When these people try to communicate with each other, let's say if I'm the marketing team and developer says I'm working with a Terraform tool,
mm,
how do I picture this as a marketing person? So we should encapsulate a language that is uniquely within the organization, define the whole umbrella of what we are actually achieving. At least we come the concept grasp in our mind. Why would I investing our time and energy
mm,
building the platform?
mm. So there's a in that you're kind of pointing to this idea that there's a larger coalition that needs to be built to support and get the adoption for the platform to work. It's not just developers; other people in the organization need to have a understanding of the value proposition, product teams, financial teams, operations teams, and things like this. Because if it's just for the developers, then other people may not understand what the value is, or may not perceive the value. Is that roughly what you're pointing at?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. If you look at the umbrella of CNCF landscape, I think this is similar situation when the virtual machine pop up. When
Hmm.
the virtual machine pop up, developers, now there's an idea concepts called don't spun a virtual machine yourself, not build a virtual machine yourself, rather buying it.
Hmm.
And when you start using buying it from the cloud, and eventually the propagation of cloud provider become visible in the IT sector, Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and
Hmm.
GCP, and few bunch of many others.
Hmm.
That's how the virtual machine eventually populate. When the container journey becomes started, and we end up in a conversation called orchestration management, then we actually see the orchestrator is actually enabling service proxies,
Mm,
ingress controllers, service meshes,
mm,
GitOps tooling, APIs, UIs, our infrastructure and management, uh, and you name it, observability, monitoring, you name it.
mm,
Then there is a concept called, we as a developer, Jabe and Saim, working on the IT sector, they know the understanding the term called observability and the monitoring. But how do I pitch this idea of monitoring and observability to my product team, my marketing team,
mm,
to let the consumers know we are the builder of, let's say, monitoring and observability tools as a SaaS platform?
mm,
It's too complicated to them to sell this pitch to the world. Rather,
mm,
it's easier to say, like, either you build the monitoring observing tool yourself within the organization and let them figure out how long it takes you to become a part of that stage. Now you are actually eventually enabling yourself for the observability rather than buying
mm,
services or the SaaS platform that actually you can consume, because your job is not building monitoring or observability tool. Your job is to sell the best product to your customers. If you are
mm,
using, if you're building these tooling within your organization, or GitOps tooling, or ingress control, or service meshes within yourself, remember, this is not your job. Your
mm,
job is to make sure your customers are succeeded with your product, with your application and your design thinking, rather
mm,
than building these tools. I think a similar story with the virtual machine and the container. If you try to compare those, or take an X-ray out of both, or you
mm,
actually print the paper of both sides, I think you see a similar story,
mm,
absolutely similar. With the
mm.
virtual machine, we came with the last propagation started. Don't need to build anything. We need to buy something. And the
Yeah.
last propagation of this wave is the same. Don't
Mm,
start building anything. Try to
mm,
buy it from somebody else, because it's actually moved, is actually helped you reduce cognitive load. And cognitive load is not easier. I
mm,
know it. Like, if you're asking your team to build a monitoring observability solution yourself, it's too difficult. They need to learn Prometheus. They need
yeah.
to learn Grafana. They
Yeah.
need to know how Jaeger tracing work. And sometime, like, I think nerdy like us are happier to do this, but not anybody is wanted to go the rabbit hole that way. So I
Right.
think the conversation started similar passion in a virtual machine and the container era. They going in a same direction, virtual machine in the container era, but there are nuances and new technologies propagate, but the result is absolutely the same. The
Mm,
build versus buy, the
mm,
platform engineering. On that era, we term the coin DevOps engineering.
mm,
In the container era, we term the coin platform engineering. I
mm,
think that's the best way to describe how these two technologies actually evangelize this whole IT space.
mm. So, so you pointed at Borg a little bit, and kind of like as a history lesson for people to kind of get a better understanding of how we arrive in this container era. Borg is an interesting starting point. Um, why what kind of pressures, or what kind of evolutionary pressures were put on these systems that made them want something different than VMs? That now containers were something that were new. What like kind of special characteristics do containers have in this new kind of platform engineering um, perspective as we've moved forward, kind of with the cloud native stuff? Do you have a feel for that?
Yes, I think if you look at the developers specifically,
Mm,
I think they have used virtual machine in way too much, and they realize one very important thing:
mm,
there is a trial in virtual machine. You know it or you doesn't know it. There is a trial, and
mm,
I can convince you there's a trial.
yeah.
Number one, the trial is every time you spun an application. If you do it virtual machine yourself, you actually might have a data center, on-prem data center, where you have infrastructure team already created virtual machine for you,
Mm,
and then you left the team. And remember, let's your project flops, what they had to done, the infrastructure team, they have to revoke permissions of the machine that is accessing previously by the different team
Mm,
members.
mm,
They have to tear it down.
mm,
They have to give away access from every team members, or specifically they have to close it down, and they have to do it every time.
mm,
This is a trial for infrastructure management team. From and from the development perspective, they don't have access to machine.
mm,
They are the developer. They're writing application on the laptop.
mm,
They're spinning up locally. They have dev environment. They actually testing the application in the different setup. And
mm,
once they see the application working properly, the next phase is to let the world know about it, what the work we are doing. For that conversation, they file a ticket in Jira. Infrastructure team, can you please create a machine for ourselves? Wonderful, machine is created. Oh, I couldn't access it. Please give me the permission to access it. Wonderful, I can
mm,
access to it. A newest member in the team join our team. Now he need to access the machine. Oh, good it. Go ahead. Go hand it over to him. He can access the machine now. What happened in the day 03? He accidentally deleted some of the binaries from the virtual machine that my application needed to run it on that particular virtual machine.
mm,
Oh, infrastructure team, can you please create a rule in a virtual machine that this person can have read-only access and view any access and doesn't update or doesn't delete anything in that virtual machine? Oh,
mm,
access granted, your permissions is updated. Now you ask your team member to do the same activity again. Remember what happening, what I'm emphasizing here is a trial
mm,
from the development perspective. They
mm,
have to file a Jira ticket. They have to communicate on the Slack, on the Gmail on daily basis. Please do this, please do that. And then eventually they try to deploy application, and that application move over the different zone. And
mm,
that's trial in virtual machine. And we solve those. The reason I think developers like this container revolution is they see a need for the removal of toil.
mm,
How? Number one, they spin up container and put it over to the Docker hub. Next member join the team. They pull the container images, run the container. They don't need to update any binaries. They
mm,
don't need to anything else. Now,
mm,
let's say you work in a microservices application. Your task is just to communicate those APIs that the backend people wrote. So now you just spun up the container locally. It's might be running 4001 local post. Now you spin up your container. All it's need to have a port available. You can access the backend API. What is happening here is where I'm actually asking infrastructure team, can you please give me access to the infrastructure API? No, that's removed. That is a solid reason. That's why the container revolution is started. And I think this revolution is far better than the previous one. The only reason is that the internet is accessible to everyone. Communities are spreading like a wildfire, and software engineering is not just become a norm, it's an essential to survival for the business. That's why the container revolution is become a huge impact for the lot of organization, for the startup, for not just me and you. We don't know how many people are benefited from this revolution of container.
cool. Yeah. And when I was listening to you, there's a couple things that kind of makes me think about. One was like one of the beauties of containers, right, is like VMs are hard to move around. Like you were describing a developer being able to like pull a VM down, a container down quite quickly, check it back in quite quickly. Whereas VMs, it takes a lot to move those things around. So the containers seem to be lighter weight, seem to be easier to share. So that there's some significant advantages there. But the other thing that I tend to think about when I think about VMs versus containers is having managed VMs. They don't have like an easy API based way of interacting with them naturally, because most of the tools were built for people who are used to literally managing rack and stack machines. So they have this other kind of like, it's an inventory management system. It's, like a lot of GUI, click and point, XML document type stuff. Whereas containers from the very beginning have been built to be more accessible via API, configurable. It's a lighter weight all the theory behind it seems to be about enabling automation, not just inventory management, for instance. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think if you look at the container, how this actually eventually pop up, the Docker, the company that's called Dot Cloud, is building up some tools called Universal Control Plane for actually deploying application with a different cloud provider, and they
Mm,
seems to come up with these final thoughts. This is not doable because every cloud provider has different set of APIs, and they're
mm,
like, oh, does our work of 2008 to 13 is flawed, we are useless, or do we have invented something that bring attention to us, and eventually they seize an opportunity.
mm,
And Solomon Hikes sees that the internal tool we built, if we can give it to the community, this will actually boost every developer and they like it.
mm,
First they thought think like, how do we give it to the developer, because they don't know the Linux kernel, they
mm,
don't know the C group or namespaces. These are the Linux kernel enthusiasts whose job is to do not look at any other places, just to look at the kernel calls.
right.
And those people are nerdy, they can't live without it. But for me, I want to stay away from the Linux kernel as I wish I want. I
Mm,
never to touch the kernel. For
yeah.
me to give it access to me, you need a developer friendly tool, and
Mm,
Docker may make it wonderful impact.
yeah.
They made a developer friendly tool.
Yeah.
If you look at the command, Docker run, container run, Docker build, image is build, Docker pull, image is pull. But there is a one very uh, very hidden secret in all this story. For the VM, everything you need is already in place. Your app need networking, storage. Your app need proxies. Your app need binaries. Already you can place it as you like it.
Mm,
But the container is not like that.
mm,
Container give you the running container. You can run the container. In order to communicate the container with different container running on the cluster, you need a networking interface.
mm,
And this is not enabled by default. You have to bring it up.
mm,
From bring it up, you need, let's say, CNIs. In order to run the containers, you need to run runtime interfaces.
mm,
In order to store data within the container, because they comes and go, this is a pat versus what I'm forgetting, a story, pat versus cattle story.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
pat versus cattle story, and plus, if when you spun it up, only one container is not enough. You
Yeah.
need three, four, five, six, seven containers. And now, how you link it up on while you're bootstrapping,
Mm,
you need an orchestration engine. You see a feel in the orchestration engine.
mm,
That eventually become a story propagated in the people mind. I think like if I look at the cloud native ecosystem, is not more like a story or a film or the Hollywood movie. You do this and you already know what the next step is. It's similar like that, like if you are directing a film, you know the first scene is, and you already know what the next scene is.
mm,
So what the people who are working on, let's say, container, they already know there is a need for the orchestrator. They
mm,
start working on the Kubernetes orchestration engine.
mm,
Then they see you can't access the application running in the Kubernetes cluster from outside. They're working on the proxies or the ingress controller,
mm,
as which they already know it.
mm,
Then they see you have a microservices application, and these microservices can communicate with each other over the internet. and you have a TLS authentication because you have a mutual TLS enabled by default.
Mm,
Otherwise, no one like the microservice architecture,
mm,
because this communication is happening in 17 different places. As before, it's happening on only one monolith.
yep.
That is another story.
Mm,
As if people already know that the people need service machine.
mm,
Then the story propagated like container comes and go. Where do I store my data and where do I retrieve my data? I need a storage. And
mm,
storage become in the form of container storage interfaces. Mean we have a core set of APIs for you to consume it
mm,
and bring your implementation and integrate with those tooling, and now you are ready to go.
mm,
Then eventually we become to the container networking interface, to the container net runtime, to the storage interfaces.
mm,
Now the evolution coming up, we love this tooling, we love working. But remember, the point is not is to maintain and abrogate. Every company's not duty is to contribute to Kubernetes. Their
mm,
job is to consume Kubernetes and
mm,
solve the business problem.
mm,
And then there are companies who know this is difficult. Like this, if you bring in student in your companies, took them 2 years to just learn Kubernetes and cloud native stack.
mm.
So it's in the third year you actually developing app that run on Kubernetes, and in the fourth year you are actually selling solution to your customers.
Yeah.
And in that mean, when you started doing this, you might see a new wave. Like
Yeah.
that's happening for a lot of startup.
Yeah.
They started with something else, and now they're ready to solve the challenge of platform engineering. Do we have to create one, or do we need to buy one? So
Mm,
basically, I think I really like the approach of the Kubernetes community. I think really everyone who listening to me, you should appreciate it.
mm,
The Kubernetes create a giant community and help every other community to become a part of us. And they know we haven't solved any problem, but we give you APIs, we give you interfaces, we give you abstraction that you can
mm,
use to
mm.
solve other people problem. That's where I
Yeah.
think that's never happened before.
Mm.
And that's a big appreciation to the a lot of the people who are actually involved in the Kubernetes community.
Cool. Yeah, there's two things that it made me think of when you're talking. The first thing is just I love that you kind of pointed out that like containers um, containers are almost like a interface wrapped around something that already existed in Linux, right? Like if you wanted to, you could have like handcrafted a container that wouldn't have required any of this stuff. You could have like made a namespace and done a bunch of stuff with some fancy scripting. Um, but it wasn't accessible to developers. It was only accessible to, deep thought operators and or kernel hackers. And so really like there is this kind of fractal thing that is happening when we talk about platforms, and it is about making kind of more and more advanced and difficult to use necessarily natively technology, wrapping it in a way that makes it consumable by more and more developers. And it's not just containers. Then it's, as you were pointing out, it's Kubernetes and on from there. So I think that's interesting. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, because it's something that I think about a lot. So you were describing kind of like the evolution. So like we got containers and orchestration and on and on. And one of the things I like to try to convince people sometimes is that most people who try to adopt Kube right now are like trying to jump to the end of the evolutionary experiment. They want to like have the thing at the very end. And sometimes I try to say to them like, we wouldn't have got to Kubernetes if containers themselves didn't already have value. So like, since you have no containers and the problem that Kubernetes solves is orchestrating containers, maybe in your adoption journey, the first thing you need to do is just understand how to containerize things. Like maybe that's the first step. And now you have a bunch of containers. Oh, as you described, a problem comes up. You need to figure out how to orchestrate those containers. Okay, now maybe you want to do some more Kubernetes work and understand orchestration. Oh, look, you're having some issues around scaling issues, or you're having issues around service meshy type activities. But those problems, you don't have those problems until you have the precursors to those things. Like a lot of containers being orchestrated, need for like service meshy things. So I think it's really hard for organizations right now if they think that they can immediately just start. We need to start with the whole thing. We need to like every application immediately needs to be fully service meshed and blah, 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 even though we don't have anything containerized at all yet. And it's like they want to do the entire evolutionary stack like in a week. It's like, no, slow down a little bit. Like figure out how the value of each phase of this evolution, because each phase does have value. And for instance, like I think most of the value for developers is in containerization, right? It's that the developer experience of working in container versus a VM is radically different and more pleasant, right? Definitely better than the old school, like I have to figure out how to get a machine and get on it and figure out how to patch it and all that other stuff. So does that make sense? Like, how do you see people when they try to kind of figure out adoption, and should they try to think about this evolution themselves internally, or I don't know? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think if you currently look at it, like there is a one very bad thing happened to developers with the containers. Number one is that container is tremendously easy. Like I think this is a developer's heaven, to be honest. Like if you look at it, and I can tell you the truth. If you start to the one developer and ask, what do you feel about container? They say it's tremendously and wonderful technology to work with. And ask another developer, what do you feel about container? They say this is one of the toughest technology I happen to work with. And the same technology with two different propagation, we need to understand what happening here is. Number one is container is Docker run, app is on the browser, and you can test those. Forget about other technical detail, what's happening behind the scene. But the developer who is actually writing the application is a jungle of proxies, binaries, networking, storage, and everything. It's like let's say you talk about in the first place, you come to the, let's say, Iceland, and you tell a developer, let's build a jungle, rather than you saying just start gardening. And that is quite true with the container technology. And now I think this debate eventually, now where this debate actually shine is everybody come with the evolutionary, started with the container, going with the orchestration engine, need proxies in the form of ingress controller and the service meshes. Then they have observability stack, Grafana, Prometheus, and then they eventually have chaos engineering. That is the flow works in the organization. Now somebody is jumping to the end. Forget about what happening behind the scene. I think my theory is, look at the team, the development tool. Now you are using either the open source platform or the SaaS platform. Otherwise, you have to build it yourself. You can't use Kubernetes and container if you don't have a platform and you want to be the end of the ladder. Now, if you want to be the end of the ladder and you consuming infrastructure, services, and containers from the company who have paved their path for the 6 years, and after learning, they're now in the stage they can give customer their platform. You look at their journey, look at their engineering team, look at the blog they have written, look at the market presence they have got. These will tell you the value of in their platform. If you happen to work with the companies that relatively new and they start developing platforms, try to research an R&D first, because always there is a curve, there is evolutionary curve that need to be taken. Nobody jump to the loss of the ladder, because that's the beauty of the Kubernetes. That doesn't want you be to the end of the ladder. If you happen to be the end of the ladder, this mean you actually don't know what you're actually trying to solve here
Yeah.
in this jungle.
Yeah.
So basically, now you are building the jungle where people come in and they start gardening, and then you see how well they actually you and in the jungle, this mean you are actually giving them water,
Yeah.
the streaming of air, the air conditioning, anything your sand needed to grow and
Mm.
look fancier.
Mm.
This is your job, being building a jungle. And
Mm.
the people who actually are gardening here, they actually trusted your capabilities. And in terms of Kubernetes, they see like Jab or Saim knows how to work with policy engines like Kyverno and Open Policy Agent. I doesn't know it. Saim and Jab knows that they how to work with Argo CD,
Mm.
how to monitor clusters, how to upgrade and patch, how to do auto scaling of cluster using horizontal pod autoscaler and vertical pod autoscaler. People trust us that
Mm.
we know this domain. Let the lift off the burden from ourselves. The jungle is already available. We don't need to dig more sand out of that jungle. We have placed out the sand already. You just need to start gardening in here. So
Yeah.
I think you have to trust the people who build the jungle.
Cool. So when we talk about kind of like this evolution, I know in the white paper there is like a maturity model that you guys you folks have described. Can you talk us through how people should look at the maturity model, what they should get from it, how you guys how you folks discovered it, etc.
Yes, basically, I think like one of the thing I really stressed my CNCF fellow colleagues about the passage of last 3 years. Like I tell them that landscape is easier for us to navigate,
Mm.
but for the general audience, it's absolutely the once they first see the landscape, they never come back again.
Mm.
The thing is, what is happening here? Like I'm here to ease my job, not to look scarier. And that scarier deviated people to use the older technologies like Terraform or other
Mm.
technologies, and they can't see the inbuilt significant intelligence built into the CNCF tooling. So I
Mm.
stress on many of my friends, we need a maturity model.
Mm.
Like we have three technologies doing the same thing. Let's say if I somebody asks me, I need a service mesh.
Mm.
I said you can use Istio, you can use Linkerd, you can use HashiCorp console, and they are not actually, to be honest with you, they are not doing this that the Istio and Linkerd and HashiCorp give them a reward. Oh, wonderful! You use our Linkerd service mesh. Now we can give you this award. Oh,
Mm.
wonderful! You use Linkerd one service mesh for the 1 month, and you come up with the plans. Like I'm stressing here is like nobody give you if you're doing same and the same again, if you actually spun up Istio, Linkerd, and console every time, 3 times a day,
Mm.
it doesn't mean you have a Guinness Book record like you have used most service meshes in your life. So
Mm.
basically, they actually need like if I happen to be in a situation where I use a microservices application and my application are lightweighted. I just need to enable MTLS. I don't need circuit breaking. I just need a certificate rotation. Which of the service mesh I use? This is the missing piece in the CNCF. And what are the cloud native maturity model? Actually, there's another working group that's actually from, I think, the cartographer OSS working group. They created a cloud native maturity model,
Mm.
and we want to consume this model as a platform to let people, because remember, platform is a puzzle piece of different suite of services and automation framework enabled by default.
Mm.
Our job as a platform working group is to let people know if you happen to be in a scenario where you need to use a service mesh and you have these four set of constraint. Our working group, our sister or brother working groups did a research, did a hard work of combining the data, and they come to the point to know that if you happen to be in for these situation, try to use Linkerd or service too.
Hmm.
They will try to adopt it, but there has always been a challenge
Hmm.
when you actually telling people not use this or not use our. So we rather use a technological terms like other technological term. Use how you measure the performance of Istio,
Hmm.
how you measure the performance of Linkerd, to
Hmm.
let people know that we are the not judger, but you need to have a matrix in place
Hmm.
in your organization to understand under which applications I can migrate over to Istio to Linkerd or Linkerd to Istio. So
Hmm.
that can be a better answer rather than telling yes or no.
Hmm. Interesting. So the maturity model is a measurement of the maturity of the individual components of the platform as opposed to the organization. Is that right? Like I'm not measuring my organization's cloud maturity. I am this would answer questions about like how mature Istio is and Linkerd is. Is that kind of, am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. If you look at it, I think right now, the currently, if you look at it, like we have two things to consider. One is the how do we measure the platform team metrics? Like
Hmm.
they did good or bad,
Hmm.
and then the measuring the platform metrics involve how efficiently developer deploy and move code from different environment to all the way to the production. So
Hmm.
this means the maturity consists between or dependent upon the platform teams metrics are dependent upon the services and the way they organize the platform. So
Hmm.
I think that one maturity model is for how they actually decided what services to put on,
Hmm.
what measuring instrument they actually use,
Hmm.
and plus the team who actually built the platform, how do we measure their impact within the organization? Because remember, we started the conversation, platform is not just a developer tool,
Yeah.
it's consumed by different people within the organization with the need they actually looking into.
Hmm.
So the one is measuring the services that they actually wrote or provided as the form of APIs, plus the team who actually working on the platform. How do we measure the platform itself?
Hmm.
And then there is so much into it, because if you want to measure the platform, might be you have monitoring, observability, storage, service meshes, service proxies,
Hmm.
developer portals, or APIs, or UIs, or the Swagger APIs, or testing framework. So within those, each of those have owned their matrices. But I think at least we convince people to try to measure, because now we are lifting your job, but now it's your job to understand.
Hmm.
We're lifting the burden from you,
Hmm.
and your job is to calculate or measure the matrix, or actually implement the matrices within the platform,
Hmm.
because those metrics tell you how good the platform is.
Hmm. So when we one of the things we see a lot when we start having these conversations, kind of pointing down the path that you're pointing at, is eventually we get to a point where we want developers to have kind of more self-service access to these various components, platform pieces, things like that. Um, I'm interested, like in your ideas, or what you would think about as far as like the importance of self-service, but some of like the problems we start seeing kind of emerge with self-service. Like how do people govern? How's self-service governed? Should the team govern themselves? Should there be should the platform team be governing self-service? How does that work? And then also, as we accelerate self-service, we give people access to more and more things, we kind of have the classic issues of like security. How should people think about making sure that their teams are using best practices, et cetera, to make sure that their systems aren't degrading the security posture they have, and or kind of spinning out of control with a lack of governance. So like how would you think about this new kind of governance, risk, compliance landscape and self-service interacting? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a wonderful conversation, but I think this is a very largely debate around different domains. I think currently, if you look at the platform engineering,
Mm,
we doesn't able to understand how the subdomain within the platform engineering works.
mm,
Everybody has their own opinions around subdomaining the platform
mm,
engineering.
mm,
Somebody called this internal developer platform.
mm,
Some call is automating the infrastructure using Kubernetes API.
mm,
Some says self-service. Some say consuming or abstracting these services from the developers.
mm,
So I think this all story tell you the one thing: we haven't come up to this at this point to let people know what the domain or subdomain within the platform engineering look like. So I think it's a tougher. People who are listening to us might not agree with us what we actually told in a minute here, but the way I see it, I think your platform should be composed of at least you have a six guiding principle for your platform and your platform teams.
mm,
Number one is you have a consistent automation.
mm,
That is mandatory. I think
mm,
the team committed to automation that is standardized and applied consistently across the organization end up reducing the company's total cost of ownership for Kubernetes by leveraging GitOps methodologies that use existing and familiar CI/CD tooling. So
mm,
number one is CI/CD is consistent automation.
mm,
Number two is security preparedness, meaning a zero trust security principle for user accessing and endpoint projection are key to secure and low risk Kubernetes environment.
mm,
Security teams should be able to allow user access through a hierarchical access management model with fine grained permission. I think the security preparedness will we're telling people in Kubernetes we have a role model called or role-based access control. This is enabled by default.
mm,
Either you have to implement it individually or you need a tooling. For the tooling, you have different tools available in the market. One of the tools we are working on is that's called Parallels. That enable, like if you want to access different Kubernetes cluster over the network, we give them a service account, and then you can enable those cluster on the fly, and then we revoke those permission as soon as the request propagated and response get back. So this means you have the zero trust model already embedded in, meaning you know who does what.
mm,
The next principle I think is centralized visibility, because you want to know which team or which person within the team does what.
mm,
Team should always be able to view alerts, verify cluster health, check metrics that are relevant to them through a single plane of clause.
mm,
And the next matrix is maintaining governance. That's a huge part of it. So I think I try to people let them know how to think about governance. Remember, within the organization, let's say we adopted this mindset. We never use images that are hosted on Docker Hub. We want to host those container images on Red Hat Quay, and we never put them on the Docker Hub.
mm,
But incidentally, anybody can do it. How do we actually restrict to it? The humans tend to do mistake, and that's
mm,
why we're doing automation for others.
mm,
So as a developer, we are also humans. We tend to do mistakes. So we need to have a policy engines that define a policy.
mm,
Every time you actually denies that the cluster or organization wide policy, you
mm,
doesn't able to apply anything on the Kubernetes or the cluster wide. So that's called governance. And the next thing, this is fifth one, I guess. Next one is central. This is fourth one, and the next one is Kubernetes distribution flexibility. There is so many distribution available. You need to come up what the distribution you are using: EKS, AKS, GKE. Whether the distribution you are used by yourself, or you actually buy a solution that gives you a management option or the operational capabilities, or lift off the burden for you and manage this on behalf of you. You should consider using AKS in Azure, EKS in AWS, GKE in GCP, ensuring that the Kubernetes platform of choice allow for the flexibility, and enable you to have a lock-in free approach to Kubernetes management.
Mm.
And the last we spoke about self-service, and according to some of the data, is nearly all platform teams, 94% of the team and the application platform teams, and 89% of the application developer believe it would be valuable to have a self-service workflow or portal where developer can provision environment themselves. So we have our platform should be orient themselves to self-service. Platform team manage, govern, and secure the shared infrastructure, centralize access policies, compliance, and cost management. That's must to have it. So I think with all that is mind, with the platform approach that delivers Kubernetes as a shared service across the organization, all internal teams have the ability to request compute resources and request access to said resources on demand.
Mm.
A platform team model provides a centralized self-service infrastructure that can grow and change with the organization. In turn, you standardize workflow, control operational cost, and gain the visibility and control need to genuinely scale. So I
Mm.
think that is my key takeaway. So basically, from the whole this conversation, I stresses the fact the platform need 3, 4, 5, 6 according to different organization.
Mm.
You have to have a consistent automation, orient self-service model, Kubernetes distribution policy, governance. These are the must capabilities to have it. I think for any platform,
Mm.
governance is a must. In
Mm.
short, I'm saying is either you have to understand how the policy engine works, either you trust the team that already know how the policy engine works.
Mm. Cool. Um, so one of the things I was wondering about too, that is just get some comments from you about this to think through this a little bit. A lot of our discussion today, when we're talking about toil, we're primarily talking about like reduction of cognitive load for developers, removal of toil from developers, things like this, which is good and important. I'm wondering if you're running a platform team, or you're in a platform team, or you're a platform team member. How do we remove toil from the platform team? How we like what are the things that platform teams people should think about around removing toil from the platform itself, like as a platform team member, or removing cognitive load from the platform team? Like how are we're not just like pushing the cognitive load to someone else, right? How do we how should we think about that stuff? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think you've done a wonderful. I think that's a wonderful question to consider here in this debate. I think the platform team's repetitive tasks include revoking permissions, pre-configuring role across clusters, namespaces, projects, setting up RBAC, and might be more. I
Mm.
think this is the most obvious toil from the
Mm.
platform teams. So
Mm.
basically, what we say is like Saim in a cluster don't have to access or don't have to the right to update or modify the namespace called Jabe.
Mm.
He don't have permission to it.
Yep.
It's mean we can only give them a view only permission,
Mm.
and in future we can give them a right to update and delete it. This means you have to do it again, and sometimes you delete a namespace and automatically the permission is also revoked.
Mm.
So these are the trial for the platform teams. You can tell your mom I can have a wonderful degree of giving people access to the management of Kubernetes cluster, but in reality this is a toil. This
Mm.
is a toil. You
Mm.
like it or not, this is a toil. Remove the toil, whether you use open source tooling. I think there are in the Kubernetes landscape, there are tools exist to remove this kind of a toil. I think I will. So one of the tool that we are working on is actually we see the need in the industry. We see the Kubernetes landscape. We see there's a not an hour back solution available.
Mm.
Everybody implementing RBAC uh, according to their organization, according to their need. But remember, there are some things that any RBAC ruling requires,
Mm.
like what our platform parallel, what the parallels does is basically when you log into the parallels using an IDP like GitHub, Azure, Google, any IDP, you can log into the parallels, and then you actually add a user called Jabe and give Jabe a read-only permission to project called, let's say, multi-tenancy.
Mm.
And then Jabe has login via their IDP, and then you log into the parallels dashboard that doesn't able to see anything else, just the
Mm.
things he actually consider. So
Mm.
this means he has the read only or view only of the cluster that is that is actually more meaningful to Jabe
Mm.
rather than to the admin team. So I
Mm.
think one of those trial can be removed via open source tooling. But remember, platform sometimes remove toil, and when you first time working with a platform, it's bring in 10% more toil,
Mm.
and
Yep.
it's your job is to remove, because the platform you are actually consuming is built by other team, and they have 7 different services available, and they're not actually built in a self that they can remove toil. It's your job how you consume those services. And I think the Kubernetes API, the concept of automating the infrastructure using Kubernetes API is gain popularity,
Mm.
is gain tremendous amount of popularity. Basically, what it tells people, because this is one of those ways the toil can be removed. Basically, what the Terraform does is you don't need to click 17 different buttons to create an EC2 instance. You write a YAML file or you write a HashiCorp file, and that can actually plan the Terraform, and the infrastructure is stood up, and you start integrating with the cluster. That is one thing. And the infrastructure Kubernetes APIs is actually you can consume via, there's a project called in the CNCF called Crossplane. It
Mm.
lets do that. It's
Mm.
doing the job of similar to the Terraform, but it's give you more insights. You can consume the APIs and build AWS, Azure, GCP clusters. And those this tool works tremendously well. And I
Mm.
believe if you happen to confront with the tool, you see a removal of toil as well. But remember, this has to be consideration in place. Remember, this is a new domain. You have different organization, and always hype create I think the hype work in a way like sometimes it's create winning stories, but 90% of the time it's create losing loser stories as well. You end up moving into the hype, everybody start doing about platform engineering, and you don't need it. Don't
Yeah.
invest in it. This
Yeah.
might be you might be the Kubernetes lens tool is actually the solution to your, might be the Kubernetes lens tool is the
Mm.
solution to your 90% of the problem, and you
Mm.
end up investigating different platform.
Mm.
Please never do this. Try
Mm.
to research and orient yourself to be a learner, not
Mm.
just consumers.
Cool. Sam, it's been great talking to you today. Can you, before we close, can you, what are 3 things people should take away from the conversation? 3 things they might do or research they should think about? What do you think are the 3 most important things to take away from the conversation today?
I think number one is, remember, there is a revolutionary curve between containers to Kubernetes to platform. You
Mm.
have to understand how the revolutionary curve grows and shrink over the time.
Mm.
Number one, the Kubernetes is not actually getting appeared, rather it's disappear. Number
Mm.
one, Kubernetes will be disappear in a
Mm.
few areas, meaning you interacting with Kubernetes, but you doesn't know where you actually interacting from.
Mm.
Kubernetes need to be disappear.
Mm.
Number two, your platform is actually have consistent automation,
Mm.
orient to self-service, and governance.
Mm.
These 3 things are enough for your platform, and you
Mm.
can add capabilities into it. And
Mm.
number three is look at your team's capabilities.
Mm.
look at your team capabilities, and thoroughly understand what are the existing knowledge they already have, what are the existing knowledge they already have, what are the buying solution or the SaaS platform that already embedded the
Mm,
existing knowledge we have in the
mm,
form of click of these buttons or IDs or the self-service or the developer onboarding tool or the developer experience tool,
mm,
and then start using it.
mm.
Remember, the existing knowledge of anything is a best pay path to your successful journey going ahead.
Excellent. Sam, if people want to support you or your work, can they find you somewhere? Is there something they can do to support you? How should people reach out to you?
So basically, Jeb, you can. I have a Twitter handle called where I'm mostly active, Cloud Native Y. Basically, I happen to work with cloud native technologies, so my recognition is around cloud native. So you can follow me there. I have a YouTube channel called Cloud Native FM, and you can search on the Kubernetes on YouTube as Cloud Native Podcast, and I have a Twitter handle called Cloud Native FM, CLOUDNATIVEFM is our Twitter handle for my podcast. So basically, I do the same work that Jabe is doing for helping people understand what the technologies, how the technologies evolve, and where they can help you most. And I do sometime we have some hands-on demos, sometime we have conversation like open-ended session. So format is always different. It is depending upon the speakers. So tomorrow I'm doing a podcast with Jim Bagwadia from the Kubernetes validating admission policies. That's a new concept being introduced in 1.26. So you can join the conversation, and we'll definitely hear your thoughts on this. But the James work is most supportive. I am really new to this business. Jabe is a very older one, and he has a wonderful experience, great hosting capabilities. I really appreciate his work. And if you happen to listen to us, gives him a thumbs up because he really deserves appreciation for the tremendous content he's producing lately. Thanks for all the great work, Jabe.
Thank you so much. I'm going to put links to all the things that Sam just mentioned in the show notes down below. It was great to have you. I hope you come back again sometime. We'll have some more conversations. I think people learned a lot today. It was wonderful to have you. I hope I see you soon.